with entrepreneurs, we've built successful organizations. We've built a successful foundation. Maybe we've got the revenue, we've got the team, we've got some of the key pieces in place, right? So we're mature. We're at a mature stage of our existence, but we keep being the one to step in and solve the problems. We keep being the ones to, whenever an issue comes up, it lands on our desk, and we're really not able to let go of that tendency. And so we end up in this problem solving loop where we solve a problem. We do so in a condition where there's kind of stress and reactivity going on around us. So our solution isn't actually creative. It doesn't actually bring our team into play, and it creates knock-on consequences, both because that solution creates more complexity in our business and because it disempowers our team from stepping forward, from stepping up and actually changing or actually taking charge of things. So that to me is the biggest dynamic. And I was working with an entrepreneur. They had a property management business, and they were very successful in the business. But what they found was they would hire people, they would train them up, they would invest in them, and then those people really wouldn't kind of perform to the standards that this owner wanted. And so he would jump in and, kind of basically go onto their patch, right? And end up disempowering them and end up creating a dynamic where they really weren't able to take ownership. And the way the entrepreneur I was working with described it, he said, he's like, I got my hands tight on the steering wheel, and then I let go and hope somebody else will take over. And then things go wrong and I grip back on tightly again. And it's really that dynamic that I think is one of the most common and one of the hardest for entrepreneurs that are wanting to transform and don't know how they're going to transform.
Do you think is complexity bad? I mean, and I'm listening to you, Chris, and I'm thinking the hundreds of entrepreneurs, I coach every quarter, and I'm thinking about we try to build system and structure around to simplify the complexity, right? Or to eliminate the complexity. But I sometimes also think though that it's almost like a drug. It's almost because when you solve, as you said, the problem, there's an applause. So it's like this, we like to think that we're not like octopuses or mice in a maze that gets, or dolphins, right? In terms of, but man, and sometimes I have this visual in my head that we are that, we just go back to little dopamine hit. But is complexity, is it a state that we need to have a healthy balance, or is it something that should be eliminated?
I'm going to answer that question, but I want to go back to something you just said because I think it's so important. You said it's almost like a drug, but no, it actually is a drug, right? It literally, it's giving us a when we solve that problem, it's really giving us that dopamine hit that is a reward, that is a form of reward. And that is at the center of reward-based learning. And so the problem that entrepreneurs get stuck in is they are pursuing reward instead of satisfaction. And that is a distinction that I think so many entrepreneurs miss because they're operating from inside the reward loop. They don't have the bigger perspective on it. We don't need to be rewarded, right? We want what we really want. When you talk to an entrepreneur, they want, a team that takes ownership. They want, in the strategic coach parlance, they want their free days. They want to be able to step away from the business. They want to be able to focus on their vision. Those are all markers of satisfaction. And the problem that happens is the reward competes for the satisfaction, and people don't realize that's what's happening because they're stuck inside this problem-solving loop. Do you recognize that in yourself from earlier in your entrepreneurial journey?
100%. What I was instantly thinking about was, and that's such a clear distinction. I don't think I've ever heard anyone actually articulate it like that, Chris, this idea of reward satisfaction. And I'd almost even put, if you wanted to even say happiness versus joy, right? In terms of something that's really quick versus something that's just this essence and being. But I'm thinking back through my journey over the last 24 years as an entrepreneur. And I probably the first the first 10 years, yeah, I'm calling it there. The first 10 years, I actually sacrificed my satisfaction in the pursuit of actually the reward. And that was, and you know what it left me though, Chris, was like this level of like, you get there and it was like, this is it. Like this is it. Like, I mean, you know, you set out some like number goals, right? And you're just like, man, when you get there, like you're supposed to just like, heavens are going to open up and like,
I hear you saying that, and I want to just say it back with a little bit of different intonation. It's like, this is it? Like, this is it? Like, this is what I've been sacrificing for? And I think that thing you're describing is so common for entrepreneurs. And it's so, to me, it's so tragic. And it's why I wrote the book. And it's why I'm in this game, because entrepreneurs work so hard. They do so much for their families, their communities, their businesses, like the whole economy, the whole ecosystem, right? I mean, entrepreneurs are, for every time you talk about an Anthropic or an OpenAI, right? I mean, there are hundreds of entrepreneurs that are laying the groundwork for all of that stuff, from, building cooling that goes to the data centers to like all of the stuff, right? Like, so entrepreneurs, they are, from my perspective, they are where it's at. And I am tired of them working so hard for so little satisfaction, right? It doesn't have to be that way. And for me, that's what I'm here to do. I'm here to help entrepreneurs grow their capacity for real satisfaction. And that's why I wrote the book. And that's what the book does. Like, the book is a guided journey on how do you go from being stuck inside that loop to how can you really design the business that works for your life? Because if you're an entrepreneur, like, and you're finding yourself in this kind of reward trap, you're not alone. Like, you're not, it's not your fault. Like, we were never taught how to do this, and it's time to change that.
Yeah. And I actually, when you're saying that, and we were never taught, because we were always taught, the fact is, when you're in school, to go for the grade, right? And you are not valuable. You are not smart. You are not worthy of achievement unless you have actually gotten that. And so I think that it's interesting, like this idea of these little dopamine pieces. I find that really interesting. Now, just to be clear though, when you're saying, and I want to make sure that what I'm hearing you say is that satisfaction is not exclusive from reward.
No, it's not exclusive. You're going to have some reward, right? I mean, look, I'm designing the business that I want to be designing. Like, when I meet somebody and I'm excited about them, or when I talk to an entrepreneur and they sign up for my diagnostic, which is kind of the starting place where I work with people, like, I am a yes, like, that is exciting for me, right? I think the difference is, am I doing this in a system that I've designed to actually give me the satisfaction that I want, or am I unconsciously running on the hedonic treadmill that is just going faster and faster as I go? So that's the big distinction. Yes, there's a reward, and that dopamine learning system, that is great, right? We need that. It's just, how do we make sure that our reward is in service of our satisfaction?
So before we get into the kind of the how pieces, because I think that people are listening to this like, okay, so what I'm hearing you say is that this is just a system structure issue. And if we just think about it differently, we can train our dopamine like finders for the thing that actually satisfaction and we can still have. So I just think it's super important. I think sometimes when people are listening to podcasts like this, or they hear about like, what you're talking about, they're like, okay, so basically this is kumbaya. No, you're talking about like, hey, still go for a big aspiration, but you can do it in a way that feels like, I can't believe. So instead of, oh my God, this is it, it's literally, you're never really looking to get there because you're in such satisfaction. That's amazing. Before we get into some of this more how pieces, I'd love to understand, because I find that entrepreneurs who are solving problems or who have the capability to solve problems are usually because they have solved these things for themselves. And so, Chris, I mean, when you went going way back to like your childhood, I mean, were you like, yep, this is exactly, I'm going to be a Harvard trained scientist that's going to first start working with like some of the largest companies in the world. And then I'm going to go, actually, the biggest impact isn't just in large companies, it's actually with entrepreneurs who are, as you said, and throughout all this stuff is all built right on the backs of entrepreneurs. So like, have you always known like, yep, this is what I'm going to do?
No, I mean, I think you know the answer to that question. Asking, no, I never could have predicted that I'd be here now, right? And even you look at some of the touch points, like people sometimes want that linear story, right? But it's like, hey, like Harvard trained, scientist, physics, biochemistry. Wall Street was my first career out of college. And then it's like, this guy's a coach. It's like, none of those things patterned with like high EQ and building relationships and working well with people that is really the mainstay of what I do now. But what those things gave me was they really gave me the ability to think in terms of systems and to see the systems and to see the dynamics that were at work. And then once I had that, I really had to go back and start to work at the like, okay, but I'm not in relationship with people. And I started recognizing that, especially when I was working at bigger enterprises, the leaders I was working with, they needed to change the way they led, and they needed to do that by building stronger relationships so they could influence across their organization, so they could really work in this new way. So no, there was no way of predicting that I would end up here. I mean, totally immersion and totally random. And to go back to something you kind of, touched on there, like, I mean, Harvard is a great example of this, right? Because, what cachet that name has behind it. And, when I was 17, 18, I mean, I applied there not having a lot of confidence that I was going to get in. In fact, I got deferred the kind of early admissions round. But I had the opportunity in high school to really do some real scientific research, and I wrote like a peer reviewed paper as an 18-year-old. I won a science competition, and so that is what ultimately opened the door to Harvard and to being able to go there. And when I graduated from Harvard and went and kind of randomly got on the orbit of Wall Street and started working at a place called Jane Street, I was by all metrics very successful, right? Like I was, making a lot of money. I was doing something surrounded by a lot of smart people. It was interesting, but I realized I wasn't satisfied. I did not have a lot of joy in my life. And I remember hanging out with folks that had gone to other kind of institutions, gone to undergrad at other places and being like, wow, like I remember spending time with friends who had gone to Carleton College in Minnesota, and was talking with them, and they were like a guidance counselor and a teacher, and I was like, wow, these people seem really happy. Like here I am, I was living in Tokyo at the time, I think, or I just moved back, and it's like these are all the markers of success I was told to get, and yet I'm very unsatisfied. And so I think you're spot on that like part of the reason that this is so important to me is because I know what that success trap feels like, because I had it very early on in my career, and I ultimately broke out of it and built something that I'm really satisfied by and built a life that I'm really satisfied by. And it took a lot of work to do it. And so I feel like any kind of shortcut sounds demeaning, so I don't really want to use the word shortcut, but like being able to package up what I have learned over my journey and offer that to other entrepreneurs, like that feels incredibly gratifying for me.
Yeah. It's interesting. I was listening to you talk about the kind of the Harvard journey, and I'm curious when we start to buy into narratives, because I think that probably, at 17, you're going like 18, you're a man. If I go to Harvard, I'm kind of a big effing deal, right? Not that you thought that, but I mean, because I think about like everyone, you have like those moments like, hey, do you get accepted in, right? You're like, I must be. I'm curious, like when you go back to like your like childhood, like did your parents like, and did you feel like, okay, this was the expectation that I was going to go to college like that? Or was it like, I mean, how'd you grow up in that? And when you think about these narratives, like in your mind, in your journey, when did you start? Obviously, you can tell when you actually stopped buying into those narratives, right? But like, because I think that this is something that we all struggle with, right? Whether the size of the house, the car, the fill in the blank, right? These are all things that have like these. I liked your word trappings of success. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, for me, I grew up in a a pretty solidly middle class home. My dad had a PhD and worked for the federal government, so he had kind of the most secure, job and career path that he could possibly have, basically, like the most risk averse career path. And when I think that these narratives started I started absorbing these narratives before I was born, right? Like both my parents had childhoods that were full of different kinds of, small t and capital T trauma. My dad's mom died when he was 14 of cancer, and nobody talked about it. Like no, it was not talked about in like the Catholic school he went to. It was not talked about in the community. It's like he just had no space to process that. And my mom had her own form of trauma. She grew up she's American, but she grew up in Venezuela. Her dad worked for um, Exxon, basically. And when she was, I think, same age, maybe 14, she got sent to boarding school in the States. So she went from being embedded in this community that she had grown up in, that she loved, to being, totally isolated. And these things are important, right? Because they flow down through us. So what did I absorb of those things, right? I absorbed kind of like, well, you can't depend on connections, you can't depend on other people. Like, choose the most secure path you can because you never know what is going to come up. You never know when things are going to kind of blow up in your world. So I think we start to absorb these things actually before we're born, and we get shaped by our families, we get shaped by our societies, our communities, our school systems, the institutions that are around us. And I'm glad you're naming this, because this is one of the things that I think is helpful about the high altitude framework, that it really, without necessarily saying, hey, we all got to get in a circle and hold hands and talk about our trauma. It's like, hey, your orientation towards control as an entrepreneur, like, where does that come from? You don't have to excavate all of the levels if you don't want to, but what you do have to do if you really want to change is you have to recognize that control gives you some benefit. So everybody talks about, hey, just delegate, right? Or, yeah, just delegate, just let go. That's so easy to say, but it's so hard to do. And so the part that I get curious about as a coach is, okay, so you want to delegate, but you're not. Like, tell me, what are the benefits of holding on to the work you're holding on to? Like, what do you get from that? What are you afraid of from a perspective of delegation? Because once you understand what you're holding on to and what you're afraid of, boy, that just opens up the possibility for you to not only see yourself, but for you to design a system that lets you move forward in a totally different way, being both aware of and also free of those unconscious things that were driving you.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing that. I think it's always good. I think the thing that I notice is that people see the success of who you are. Like they see of Chris Clearfield, multiple, you know, author and, multiple, book author. And, you just must have been, went to Harvard again, going to that point. They just see like these like almost Instagram snapshots of your peak points, but not necessarily in terms of the valleys, like where the real growth is happening.
And can I build on that? Because I realized I gave the answer from my parents' frame, but I didn't really give it from my own frame. And so, the way that contributed to me, I kind of talked about the seeking safety, the kind of, taking the more conservative path. But the way it showed up for me was, um, as an only child, um, there was a lot of subtle pressure. As an only child who was really smart, right? There was a lot of subtle pressure on me to perform. And so kind of what I untangled in my adulthood was like, oh man, like I had this relationship, like if I'm not successful, I'm not loved. Like that was a belief that I held in my body. Like if I'm not successful, I'm not loved. Or if I'm not falling in line, then, with the kind of rules or whatever, then I'm not like worthy of connection. Um, and it's interesting how these things have evolved for me. And it's interesting how I've been able to really take a look at those things and, through work with coaches and therapists and my own growth, like really taking them on and reshape them for myself and reshape those narratives. Although even now talking about it, like I feel some tightness in my throat and chest, right? Because these things, they stay with us. And it's all about kind of going back to them with awareness and compassion. And also, and this is the thing I really like not needing, I didn't need anybody else to be different for me to be on my own journey. Like, I think we can really get stuck on, hey, I need my parents to acknowledge something or to change. And it's like, no, like the kind of the gaze is always pointed inward. Like I get to be responsible for my own growth and development. I get to be responsible for my own change. And I was having a conversation with my mom the other day who she brought up, and I love my mom. I love my dad, right? Like I appreciate all that they did for me. And that doesn't mean that it was clean. You know what I mean? That's probably the easiest way to say it. So I was talking with her about my childhood the other day, and she said, I was like, hey, like I had this experience in my childhood where I was only offered connection like when I was behaving. And she was like, well, you were very well behaved. So doesn't that mean you were offered connection most of the time? And I was like, that's not really the point. The point is that like, first of all, it's a problem that I was well behaved, because you have kids, they're not well behaved. Like part of their job is to push the boundaries and be not well behaved. It's like, so I grew up in an environment where my connection and my safety was linked to sort of following the rules and being well behaved. And as I've grown up, now I'm like, fuck that. Like, I'm not interested in that, right? Like I am, my commitment as I move through my life is to disrupt the ordinary, because I think there is a lot of ordinary out there that needs to be disrupted, including what we've been talking about with entrepreneurs, like how we get stuck in these success loops. We get stuck in these traps that aren't actually satisfying. Like that is so typical for entrepreneurs, and I'm done with it. Get that out of my space.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that. And I think the thing that I've realized as a parent, like I'm not going to get through being a parent unscathed. Not to me, but to me in terms of to my kids. And I've just accepted it, and doesn't mean that I don't, focus on, hey, what's this next 1% that I can do better? But to your point, like the reality of it is, though, if you don't have the story you have, I don't think you've written this book.
Right. It's true. It's totally true.
And I think that's the part that misses, is that people like, let's talk about all our shit. At the same time, though, it's like, well, the shit that you went through is the one that helped kind of shape the narrative you have now, which I'm grateful for. So thanks, Chris's mom and dad, and all of like the other things that happen in it, which is awesome. So in your book, The High Altitude Entrepreneur, right? I think the thing that I love about it is that you give some frameworks. And so I love, because so many people listen to this, okay, hey, how do I turn complexity into an advantage? How do I take ownership and dynamics that I want, maybe don't want, into into an advantage. And I think the word that I love that you use is this success loops, which is an overarching theme of satisfaction versus that reward. Can you talk through if someone's listening to this, like, hey, how do we need to potentially think about this or rethink or re-underwrite kind of our frameworks or lenses?
Yeah, it's a great. I love the question and the way to do this. I'm just going to talk about a client I worked with. She ran a kind of high performing sort of industrial equipment repair company, and she would work with big oil and gas companies, power generators, those kinds of places that had pieces of equipment that if they went down, it was a big stop on their operation. So her and her team would go in and repair those. And what she found in her business was that she was always focused on the urgent. And you can sort of see why, right? There's in her business model, there's a lot of upside to being focused on the urgent, to being the one that kind of shows up and makes things happen, makes it happen fast, really delivers for the clients. But we were working together and she kind of was looking at her whiteboard. She was like, I have all these strategic priorities on my whiteboard and I never get to them. And that's a problem because I want to be moving this business forward. There's a lot of it right now that doesn't work for me and I want to be shifting it. And so that was the conversation we were in. Like, how can she shift that? And like I said, the traditional kind of approach is like, well, just stop doing this and start doing that. And instead of doing that, what we did is we really dug into okay, so, what is the upside of urgency for you? And what's the fear if you were to lean more into the strategic focus? And what happens the other way? What happens when you lean into that strategic focus? And what's the downside of it? What are you missing out on? And at the level that the entrepreneurs that we're talking about, the level that they're working at, their job shifts from really becoming the doer to becoming the designer, to becoming the person that is navigating the constant back and forth between what you're giving up and what you're gaining in any choice. And so with this client, she wrote me an email a couple of weeks ago and she said, hey, we just got a job that we just got an opportunity for a job that came in. Would have been, a rush order. I could have pulled the people off of their existing things. I could have paid the expedite fees for our vendors and Like we could have got it done. But I looked up at my whiteboard and I said, well, if I do this, I'm going to skip all of those strategic priorities. I'm not going to work on them. And so she just asked two questions. She asked how much profit is there in this job for us? And how is this going to affect the relationship with the customer if we say yes, if we say no? What's going to be the outcome of that? And ultimately, she answered those two questions and decided to decline the work. And it's not that that's the right answer for her, right? It's not that the right answer is to always look at strategic focus. But what she was able to do in that moment was she was actually, because of the work we had done, she was actually able to kind of map out what her priorities were and make an aware choice in the moment instead of being pulled along by her habit.
Yeah. So how do we fight this reward satisfaction sort of tug of war, right? It's based off of your hearts and minds and of the entrepreneurs. Cause I'm listener, she could have gotten hey, I can get this done. Someone's writing me a check. And that feels really good. I mean, that's the whole purpose of business, right? To bring in money, and at the same time going, okay, but I have a strategic focus. I also have some other things I'm looking to get. How do we change that lens?
Yeah, it's a great question. And the change really happens at the moment that we start to become aware. The moment that we start to become aware, the moment that she started to become aware of, hey, what's the broader dynamic I'm operating in? Instead of just being aware of the pull of the urgency, she had already started to make the change. So there's a way in which awareness is really the first step. And we get so much from awareness. as individuals. And I'm curious, as I'm talking about this, like, is there stuff that does that relate? Do you resonate with that? Like, is there stuff in your life where you've kind of become aware of?
Yeah. The words that popped in my head were the urgency is the transaction and the awareness is the transformation. In that transformation, when you actually buy into the fact that transformation is more powerful than a transaction, meaning that has a longer life cycle. The half-life of a transformation is exponentially longer than a transaction, right? Boom, boom, right? Transaction, like those, like little, and I think it's almost like a butterfly that an entrepreneur goes through, right? Is that there are caterpillars, right, who just eat, right? I mean, if you look at a caterpillar, like their whole job is to just eat, right? And sometimes I feel like that's what business and like being an entrepreneur can feel like, is you just are getting more and more, like you're trying to eat. And I think that in my mind, as I'm listening to you, Chris, and thinking about your frameworks and is that what you're helping people do is transition from just being an eater, caterpillar, into like actually the butterfly, right? And at the end of the day, butterflies are not all the same, right? Yeah, you can go, oh, that's a butterfly. Like most people can distinctly go, yeah, that's a butterfly. But when you look at each one individually, and this idea of awareness versus urgency, it's like this draw from, this like excitement of a transaction. And by the way, like I think about myself, there was immense amount of excitement in the beginning of like my entrepreneur journey when I would get a transaction, in part because that meant that I could actually pay rent. That meant that I could start to do. And then it slowly built on top of that. It was like not just survival. It was like, hey, I can actually maybe do a little something extra this month. Right. And then it starts to build beyond that, where it's like, oh, hey, I remember it used to be like a big deal. Like if I spent like $75 a night on an Airbnb, like that was like, whoa. Right. And so, but there's a certain point where the transaction almost becomes, you're just eating.
Yeah, and I really love this framing, and I'm all in on the butterfly and on the transformation. Like I'm all in on that metaphor. And the thing that you've said that's really worth emphasizing is the stuff that worked at the beginning of our business doesn't work when we get to a certain point, right? It doesn't work when we get to a certain point of complexity. It doesn't work when we want to scale. It doesn't work when we want to start to disconnect ourselves from the day-to-day running of the business. And so that, I think, is one of the hardest things for people to really take in, that, hey, when you started this business, it made sense to hustle. It made sense to chase. It made sense to be the problem solver in chief. You were the one that knew the clients the best. You knew the product the best. And if you stay in that paradigm, if you stay operating in that way, then you never break free to the next level, right? If the caterpillar could just keep eating, then it would become just a huge caterpillar that couldn't transform and could never fly. So at some point, you've got to be able to make that jump. You've got to be able to make that transformation.
So someone's listening to you today and you're going, hey, and let's assume that we're all clients of yours, right? You talked about a diagnostic. I'm guessing in diagnostics, you're asking some questions, and I'm guessing there's a couple hard-hitting ones. Like, what are the 2-3 things that if we all were your clients today, that you would be asking to be able to go, hey, here's some questions, and based off your answers off these, you probably need a diagnostic. So what are the ones that like people can have that sense of like, am I eating or am I like transforming, right? Am I transacting versus transforming? Like what would be some questions you'd ask someone?
Yeah, I love that question. I think the sweet spot where I really start to connect with people and start to contribute to their transformation, there needs to be a baseline layer of of readiness. So they're people that they really see what the next step is. They see where they want to go. They may not see it exactly, it may not be in 1080p high def. And they know that, hey, this is where I'm going, but they don't know how to get there. And they've started to realize that they maybe need to change in order for what's around them to change. Because what we talked about so far, what we talked about with these examples, what we talked about with this manufacturer who was really focused on the urgent at the expense of the strategic focus, we've talked about the work that she is doing. But one of the things I love about entrepreneurs is once we start doing the work ourselves, we really get to take this work to our teams right away and into a very, in a very real way, we get to try to redesign the way our whole system is working. And that might be by, making sure we've actually got the right people supporting us. It might be by actually, making sure we are all aware that, hey, we've got a tension in our business around delivering very bespoke services to somebody versus being really standardized and being able to kind of lean on our standardization. So if your team doesn't understand that tension's at the heart of your business, you're not going to be able to design around it. And so there's this real step of once the entrepreneur starts to kind of enter that chrysalis and change, then there's this opportunity to bring the work to the wider team. But the question really starts with, hey, do you want to be somewhere different than where you are today? And are you kind of curious about the way your tendencies have led to these conditions you say you don't want to exist?
What a great, simple question. Is there some place you'd rather be than where you're currently at now? Right? In essence, super simple, a lot of complexities in it. Right?
Yeah. Yeah. And for me, what's powerful about it is it's a gateway to people's own experiences. And that I think what's powerful about it. I like the high altitude framework is really a structure for people to do their best thinking, right? It's really a structure for them to see themselves and their teams more clearly and ultimately to create that thing that I think so many entrepreneurs want, which is a team that actually takes ownership. And if this is resonating with people, by the way, you should go to highaltitudebook.com. You can download free sample chapters. It's kind of got an overview of the kind of problem-solving loop we talked about, and then an overview of the framework. So that's a really good place to start to engage with this stuff.
Yeah. That's really interesting. What other questions would you be asking right now?
So it sort of depends on where they are, right? Where they are in that. So the way the diagnostic itself works is we talk for 90 minutes about, hey, where is your business at? Where are you at? What are you seeing? Where are you wanting to move? And what are the ways that you're kind of contributing to this situation you're in now?
Yeah, Chris, I think that those are some really good questions. And again, I don't want to give away the book. I'd like people to actually read your book. But I think when you think about who this book is designed for, the high altitude entrepreneur, can you just walk through in terms of hey, someone picks this up by the mid book, by first chapter, by the end of the book, what are they going to walk away with? And who do you think this is really going to take this and really kind of go to those altitudes?
Yeah, I think at the beginning of the book, pretty much right away, I think the thing that an entrepreneur can take away is, hey, I'm not alone in this, because the book really starts with a kind of a deep dive into hey, why is this happening, right? I think a lot of entrepreneurs, we blame ourselves when something doesn't work. We blame ourselves when, God, we know we're supposed to delegate and we're not doing it. And the foundation of the book is really an exploration of, hey, what does it look like to get in our own ways? And the fact is that we weren't taught how to do this differently. So saying to somebody, just delegate, and then expecting us to be able to do that, there's a handful of percentage of the population that can do that. But for most of us, there's so much that kind of gets in the way of that. So at the beginning of the book, you really get to see like, oh, what is underlying my patterns here? And then once you're into the framework, you're able to really go through and apply it to your own business, right? So the book has a companion workbook that you can download for free. So, as you're reading about, hey, how do you identify the core tensions in your business? You can simultaneously be identifying the core tensions in your business through that companion workbook. And so there's really this, this side-by-side mirror between the two that I think is really, really powerful. So, with the framework, you identify and map out your core tensions in the business. Those are the first two chapters of the framework. You learn how to co-design that with your team, because the way out of these tensions is not to choose one or the other, but as we were talking about that in that earlier example, to figure out like, hey, when is it appropriate to lean into one tension versus the other? And when you think about that at the scale of the business, you can think about like how do you design your business so it gets the best out of both of those tensions? And then the last chapter is really about how do you create enough space for your team to step in and take ownership. And one of the things, I know we started talking about accountability and how accountability becomes this kind of like, oh, this message of you didn't do it. And there's a whole other collaborative way to hold people to account, and hold yourself to account, so that the process of creating ownership in others doesn't become a process of offering it, getting surprised that your expectations aren't met, and then kind of retracting into your shell, which is such a common entrepreneurial pattern. But it becomes this process of working collaboratively on like, hey, what are we actually trying to do here? Why didn't this get met? And what are we going to try next? So it becomes its own form of a learning loop and of a design process. And when you put all those things together, you take an entrepreneur who is in a place where they are really that eater, to an entrepreneur who is through the other side and designing their business. Can I tell another success story from one of the entrepreneurs I worked with? What she was working on is she was working on like, what are the kind of relationships that are important for me to maintain in my business? And what are the relationships that aren't alive for me and that aren't helpful? And what are the relationships that are? And she started to just get curious about that with her own practice. And she ran a manufacturing company, and they had a big machine shop that had a bunch of tools. And she had a conversation with one of her vendors where she just really like opened up and, took the 45 minutes to form a connection instead of just kind of treating it as a to-do list that she had to get through. And he brought her a solution in terms of this tool vending machine that, like, as she said, saved her like $500,000 a year with zero work on her part. And she told me like, this wasn't even a thing that was on my top 10 list of things to do. Right. So it was by actually just shifting how she was in relationship that she expanded the resources that she had, expanded the people that she was able to kind of access and learn from. And then from that, get a real bottom line business success from it.
I had an opportunity to be kind of behind the scenes when you were developing the book. And then it's been really, really, really cool, Chris, to see in terms of what the book has become. I love that you have the companion workbook. I think that oftentimes you get a book and it's like, hey, here's all my thoughts. And what I love about how you did this is, here's all my thoughts, and now I want to hear yours. And I think that is absolutely powerful. Chris, if people want to know more about you, they want to hear more about you, they have the opportunity to engage you more. I know you are, and I don't know if it's too soon to talk a little bit about this, but you given in the green room, you were talking a little bit about you're creating a community for entrepreneurs to be able to kind of have a space. Can you talk a little bit about that, and also where else everyone else can find you?
Yeah. So the best place to start to engage with the book is highaltitudebook.com. If you hear this and you're like, hey, I want to talk with you about my business, about where I'm at, LinkedIn is where I kind of invest most of my efforts from a social perspective. So just reach out, connect to me on LinkedIn. Be happy to have a conversation with you. And then, yeah, as you said, Ben, I'm starting a community called Elevate, which is really designed to be a salon for entrepreneurs. So it's really entrepreneurs bringing something live that they are working on and then getting support from a small community of trusted folks around them. And we're still developing this kind of like, I think as entrepreneurs, we're often still developing this way of like, well, how do we work with other people? How do we build trust? How do we not step into problem solving mode? And Elevate is not only an opportunity to come as an entrepreneur and bring a challenge that you're working on, but also to come as a participant and to kind of break yourself a little bit out of that reflex of stepping in and saying, well, why don't you just do this? And kind of being in that problem solving mindset. Because that is one of the ways that I think gets in the way of us growing the capacity of our team and others around us to really create that infrastructure that we need for ownership.
I love it. I love it. Chris, thanks for blessing the podcast today. Appreciate having you on. As you may or may not know, I always love our podcast guests to leave the last word, the last ripple, the last question, the last thought. What would you leave our audience with today?
I would leave the audience with an invitation to ask the question that we've touched on a couple of times in a really compassionate way, which is, how am I contributing to these challenges around me that I say I don't want to exist? Because I think that's a really powerful opening to the work of transformation that we all get to do.
That's such a good one. And I appreciate the emphasis on giving yourself grace and empathy around that. So, Chris, thank you so much for being here. Thanks for being on the podcast. And I'm excited to hear how the audience likes your book, which I'm most definitely, I think is probably the most appropriate way to say it. But I'm excited for them to read it. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thank you, Ben. Thanks for the opportunity. And thanks for your thought partnership behind the scenes over the years on this. It was a real contribution. I get to thank a lot of people in the acknowledgments of the book. And I thank you specifically because it was a real contribution to my thinking and how I approached this whole project. So thank you.
Hey, it's about being high altitude, right? Got to be up there in the flight levels. So, all right, Chris, thanks for being here.
Yeah, thank you, Ben.
Thank you for listening. A big thanks to Elation Lab for the production and creative design. Remember to like, subscribe, and follow us on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. Keep listening for more Max Life.